record. There we go. Okay. So we are recording. Let me see if I pin myself. Okay. So great. Welcome. We are going to talk tonight about asking for what we want. And this whole realm of expressing desire and making requests, like I said, is so vulnerable because desire can be so intimate. And up until now, I've even mentioned, please write about your desires, listen to your desires, explore internally what's there, and you never ever have to tell anyone even what they are. Like, this is between you and your desire. And so clearly, expressing our desire is a whole other step. And it means exposing, making vulnerable what's inside of us, this deep longing, or might even be actually something that seems quite small, but is really sensational. We've talked about how sensational desire can be. And to bring it out to another is there's a lot to feel there. Now, it's not uncommon for people to want to just skip when we come to this. It's like, oh, we might do all this exploring of desire and then go, actually, I think I'm okay with things as they are, you know? And I think I mentioned this in the first class, that until we are truly at home with our desire, until we have this intimacy with desire, that it's like skipping a step, it's leapfrogging, it's compensatory to jump to just being okay with what is. When I teach around mindful sexuality, I talk about the difference between asking for what we want in sex and learning to get off with whatever's happening. Like, there is a possibility that, like, ooh, someone's touching me and squeezing me, and it can be so good. I can learn to turn on to whatever the feeling is. Or I can sometimes instead make a request and ask for an adjustment. There's power in both of them. And if we don't have the capacity to ask for what we want, are learning to just get off or trying to just be good with what is in a way, it's not true. It's not true all the way through. In the same way that I tell people, until you can really say no, and this is about even receiving a request, until you are totally confident in your own no, again, your yes can be compensatory. It's based on fear of saying no. And so I also, when I work with people, I often have them practice their no. Just say no a lot until you become so comfortable with saying no. And also, on the other hand, until you become comfortable hearing no, that then you can have some more freedom with yes. You're not reliant on the yes to be okay. And so, this is where we want to look at, like, okay, can we feel an ease with all of it? Can we feel an ease with asking? Can we feel an ease with saying no? Can we feel an ease with saying yes or receiving yes or no? And so to look at for yourself, like, oh, where am I at with asking for what I want, with expressing my desire, and then receiving whatever the response is. And just like when I was saying, the practice of desire is not necessarily about the object of desire, about getting it the exact thing you want. It's more about being willing to be in relationship with the feeling, the energy of desire. I'd also invite you to think about requests and expressing desire as a practice, and that it may not be ultimately about getting the exact thing from the person that you're expressing to or requesting of, but that you start making a practice of asking, because the simple act of asking is like an act of respect towards your desire. It's acknowledging, oh, this desire is good, this desire is right, and it has a right to have a space and to be expressed. And of course, that brings us up against all of the shame, the conditioning. This even just came up in the Q&A, right? Like, oh, if I'm the woman who says that, if I'm the woman who asks for that, what does that say about me? Wow. So in asking for what we want and expressing our desires, we get the opportunity to work with a lot of the shame or fear conditioning. That's really powerful. So you can even start thinking of like, what's one thing that's been showing up on my desire list in my writing I've been doing? And to imagine, what would it be like to express that? What would it be like to ask for that? And just, you can even start to notice, what are the fears that come up? What are the thoughts that come up? It's so helpful to see. And then to look at like, okay, what part of me is fearing those things? So we get into the practice, and I come back to this over and over again. This is all a practice. We get into the practice of speaking desire and learning to be comfortable with the sensation of it. Wow, there's a lot of electricity, maybe even as you started to imagine that desire and what it would be like to express it, how much you feel in your body. And it's not about learning to be so calm, so equanimous in asking. In fact, I would say it's about learning to be with that amount of sensation. And this is actually, like we were talking about, one way of bringing in that vitality. You know, you have this foundation of safety and stability. Wow, bringing in desire and the sensation of it certainly can light things up. You could start noticing how your genitals feel when you start expressing desire. There's a lot of heat there. So you can notice that. You can make it a meditation, become mindful of, oh, wow, this is all the feeling that's here. Now, I want to just take a moment and note the difference between expressing desire and asking for what you want, because there is a difference, and it can be really helpful with a partner, friends, people in your life to practice the difference. There is an acknowledgement that you have desire for something. Like, there's a difference between saying, oh, I have a desire to go to Italy, and a request, which would be, will you go to Italy with me next March, right? And so we might even start by simply learning to express some of our desires. And we might even say to our partner, you know, or a friend, or whoever it is, a lover, I want to start telling you some of the things that I want. I want to start sharing some of my desires. These aren't requests yet. Maybe I'm not ready to actually request it. Maybe I just want to be in the practice of expressing it. Oh, I'm curious about these things. I have a desire to explore this in sex. I have a curiosity about this in our intimate relationship. I'm not yet ready to move towards an actual request. A request is a concrete a request for a concrete deliverable action. Like, would you? Can we? May I? That would be a request. And so, no, you can actually play between these two. Maybe you want to start with the simple expression of desire, putting them out there. And then at some point, you might actually want to make it a request. So, something to explore. Now, a couple of things to know is I do suggest as you do this. Oh, actually, there's one more thing I want to say. There's a difference also between what I'm saying, where there's the expression of desire, the request for desire, and then there's a demand, right? A demand would be, you have to do this. Sometimes a demand might be appropriate. It might be actually like an expression of a boundary. It might be like, this is required or I'm going to go. You know, maybe whatever that looks like for you. There could be the like, oh, I would really like you not to drink. Then there could be like, would you not drink? And then there's, if you drink, I'm going to need to leave. So that's a difference between those three things. Now, so sometimes it's appropriate to have a demand, but most of the time what we want to look at is what happens for a lot of us is that we skip the expression of the desire because it's quite vulnerable. We are uncomfortable with actually requesting it. and it builds up until it comes out as a demand, either covert or overt. It might come out in just absolute irritation. So I was saying before is these things can build and they turn into irritation. So we want to look at, can we catch it earlier? Can we be in this living relationship with it so it doesn't just build underground internally until it comes out as a demand? And demands, and when I hear people in that kind of demand, or you might even think entitlement, or aggressiveness, agitation, I often think like, oh, where is it that there was a discomfort with the vulnerability of desire? And where is it that when I get to that place of feeling that way, it's like, oh, where did I not along the way actually stay so connected to and be in the vulnerability of expressing my desire? And so there's a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum of communication here that we can play with. And I really invite you to look at what's inside of my range. Range is what we can stay conscious with. So we might think, well, I'm going to go big. I'm going to ask for the biggest thing. And, we go in and we say it, and then we kind of blow ourselves out, right? and there's a truth to that. When we go out of our range, often it's like we knock ourselves out. We go home and we just fall asleep, or we have an accident or something like that. And it's because we don't have the capacity to stay with the sensation of it. So we want to practice on an edge. I call it like a living edge. We want to feel it. We want to feel the discomfort or the intensity or excitement of it. And we want to be able to stay present in the asking of it, maybe even feel like, wow, it's a lot, but be able to stay conscious through the process. It's not so helpful to go to places where we knock ourselves unconscious, and especially if you're a striver, or you're really excited, or you live big, you might find yourself doing that. It's like, oh, I'm going to throw myself over the edge. And it's like, oh, wait, afterwards, it's like, there's a bit of cleanup to do, right? So, or you might be on the side where you're extra cautious and you never let yourself feel that vitality. The vitality is scary to feel. So we're looking to nestle up against the edge, but not necessarily go over. That's our practice. And that's going to look different for each person. Let me say that. For some people, their edge might be quite far out. And for others, it might be, ooh, it's like really tender and quite close in. And you'll know for yourself. This is your practice to do with yourself. And you start by trying and exploring, what is it like to express? And then as we're in that, as we're at our edge, how do we hold that pose? You could think of it sometimes in yoga. I was actually at a yoga class the other day where it's like holding a pose for a longer period of time. And it's like, wow, your muscles are kind of shaking and your body's adapting to this new pose. And you kind of think like, maybe I should really get out of this pose. But actually your body's learning to be in a new way. It's really beneficial. And so how do you stay with the sensation, with consciousness? That's going to be a lot of your practice, is staying with it and learning to be with that energy and vulnerability of desire. So staying connected to your body, staying connected to your heart, to your awareness. So those are a couple of things as we practice this, going into this territory of expressing. The final thing that I want to talk about is in expressing it, we might think, when is it helpful to express a desire? Because there is just the practice. Sometimes we're in the practice and it's a little messy, or it's not quite on the right time, but we're just learning how to do it. And I would say for a lot of people where they've held back a lot of desire, or tried to be so appropriate, or tried to be so mindful, or are used to holding everything in and never asking or expressing, I say, like, you know what? It's okay to be a little messy. It's okay to just try a bit and try it out. And some people might be a little surprised, or might be like, well, I didn't expect that of you, or, and it's like, okay, because we're learning something new, and it's okay to be a little messy as we learn something new. We're giving ourselves some freedom. That said, I was actually thinking of the Buddha's teachings on right speech. And they're really interesting when thinking about desire, because he basically said, and this is a long time ago, right? 2,500 years, just over 2,500 years. He said, what is right speech? Basically, a right speech is when a statement, what you're saying, has 5 factors. And here's what those 5 factors are: it's spoken at the right time, it's spoken in truth, it's spoken affectionately, it's spoken beneficially, and it's spoken with a mind of goodwill. And so I'll say a little bit more about that. I mean, we even already said the thing about it's spoken affectionately. That's the difference between letting it build up into necessarily like an agitated demand. Affectionately towards yourself and the others, I would also say. And so, the Buddha goes on and says, like, oh, if it's not true, if it's not factual, if it's not beneficial, if it's not endearing, if it's totally disagreeable, don't say it clearly, right? It's like, okay, there's some things that are pretty clear. Or if it's known to be factual and true, but it's not beneficial, it's not endearing, and it's not agreeable, that it's not necessary to always say those things, because it might not be helpful. Now, here we're getting a little closer to some of our cases. If it's true, like this is a true desire for you, if it's beneficial, but it's not necessarily endearing and it might be disagreeable to others, what the Buddha said is have a proper sense of the time to say it, or a sense of the proper time. So he actually says, yeah, you got to say those things. Even if they are disagreeable, it's important to say them and to know when to say them. And our challenge is sometimes we think it's never the right time, right? Because we're uncomfortable. But the other thing is that if it's unfactual and untrue, but it's endearing and agreeable to others, we can think of often where we say yes when we really mean no, where we go along with things and we don't speak our desire, like we're not actually honest because we're trying to be endearing and agreeable. He said in those cases, you do not do that. You don't speak untruthfully or unfactually when it's not, even if it's beneficial and agreeable to others. It's a really potent lesson. I mean, this is a really challenging instruction, right? And he goes on, basically to say, and that, when you know it to be factual, true, beneficial, endearing, and agreeable, you sense into the proper time and you say it. And why is that? Because the Buddha has sympathy for all living beings. And so, to take that into consideration, really what is taught here is that to feel for what's true in our heart, what's true in our body, and having the courage to stay with the sensation, to be able to say it, and then to have care for the people around us as we do that, even if it's disagreeable to them, even if it's hard for them to hear. We can share these desires with compassion. Compassion does not necessarily mean holding back. It means being able to speak it in connection with compassion. And so this is a lot of the practice of desire, is being able to tune into it ourselves, like we were talking about in the first class, being able to be aware of and navigate the fear and shame that arises, and then stay with the sensation as we begin expressing it in the world. Because expressing it in the world is where it can start moving towards a possibility for us, towards having. And actually, in our next class is when we're going to talk about actually receiving desire. What does it look like to receive desire? So I want to invite you to think about this, to think about some desires that you've been having, and you could think of small ones. You might think of small things like you might be someone who goes to a restaurant or goes to get your coffee in the morning and you really want it a certain way, but you go, I don't want to bother them. Like I'm just okay with getting it as it is. Oh, I don't want to be one of those people that's fussy. what would it be like to start asking for something exactly as you want it? It's such a small exercise, but what would it be like to order your tea or your coffee, or your breakfast or whatever, exactly as you want it, exactly as your body's asking for? Or what might it be like with a partner or friend to start sharing some of the desires you have that you haven't expressed, to start talking about desire? Maybe it's not even ready to move into a request, but to start putting them out there. So start feeling into that. And in a moment, we're going to move into an exercise where we can practice beginning to do this, both expressing desire as desire and then expressing desire as request. I'm going to stop the recording first.